you're a business person first and an HR person second. And if you lead with learning theory or HR policy, you will not be invited back. To be a skills-based organization, you have to begin to think like you're managing your skills portfolio like you would a stock portfolio. I am not the learning police. I do not make you learn. That's not my job. My job is to create the conditions for people to do the right things. I'm a behavior architect. If you find that you're in a period of stasis where nothing is catalyzing change, you better catalyze it yourself, because human obsolescence is absolutely a real thing. Do I think generative AI is a step change in a new way? 100%. But is it going to displace everybody tomorrow afternoon? No. Humans are imbued with some magical, durable things that are impossible to code. AI is getting all the press to be unapologetically human. What if this place is for sale?
Hi, and welcome to Leaders in Learning. I'm your host, Shauna David. Today, I'm sitting down in New York City with Cameron Hedrick. Cameron is well known for his future-focused approach to learning and development. He started his career as a jazz musician, and now he helps employees find their own rhythm so that they can unlock their potential. With more than 2 decades in the field, Cameron has seen and spearheaded significant transformation in the financial sector, leveraging talent, culture, L&D in pursuit of strategic goals. I'm excited to dig into how an aspiring jazz musician turned financial sector learning executive has transformed learning and how he sees the future of skills, AI, learning, and leadership playing out. Welcome, Cameron. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really well, and I'm so happy that you're here in New York, ready to talk about learning, music perhaps, and all things people development. Like today, we're going to talk a lot about what makes people tick and how can corporations make the most out of our innate desire to learn and grow. And I want to start with you because you've had quite an unconventional, twisty, windy career path.
Yes.
Starting off as a musician, now turned executive in a financial institution. Tell me how that happened.
Well, it was not by design.
Okay.
I can tell you that. There was no master plan. It was a little bit of a twisty road. But my path really started the day I opened up a trumpet case in the 5th grade. I wanted to play the drums, but my mom said, maybe you should choose a different instrument. And a trumpet arrives, and I open the case, and I'll never forget it. I still go back to it a lot. The smell of it, it's got a smell of oil and a smell of metal. And I figured out how to put it together, and I had no idea how to make the sound. But that started this really slow journey of learning and staying focused, and that's where it started for me.
Building and honing your skills for many years.
Yes.
Do you think that background, that like musically focused, that tenacity to learn something new, did that give you any superpowers when you came into the corporate world?
There's a number of things that I'm grateful for that music helped with. In music, it is by design, it's a deferred gratification endeavor. It's a lot of time alone, working on the basics, very little time in front of people doing your thing relative to that. So just discipline and deferred gratification is one. Another is that you learn, again, nobody's telling you this, you just are doing it. That you have to work in an ensemble. You have to work in a group, and you don't want to be louder or softer. You want to play your position. Sometimes you're a soloist. Sometimes you step out and do your thing.
Yeah.
But the majority of the time you're a part of a team. And just having that ingrained was important to me. And then finally, I think just learning how to create, but inside of parameters. We were talking just before the session about classical music.
Yes.
Very narrow parameters that you can create in. Jazz is a bigger window.
Yeah.
So those are a few things that, again, in hindsight, I've been able to translate these things in various ways into the work world.
You think about a famous quote from Einstein, I think, like, innovation only happens with constraints. You can't actually innovate unless there are some
With
boxes.
constraints, it's true. It is counterintuitive, isn't it?
It
But that is true. And it's true in all kinds of professional and personal situations, because life by design is constrained, isn't it?
And messy and complicated.
all of those things.
Straight lines don't typically.
Humans in general are messy and complicated, and that's a big part of my job. Actually, is helping people understand that there is a range of humanity, and the responses are not linear. But we'll probably get to that later.
Well, and I'm curious if you flip that question on its head a little bit, and if you're looking from a corporation's perspective, do you think they value that atypical career path enough? Do they've got the right systems in place when they're thinking about hiring to like see those unique characteristics as a bonus to the organization? Do you think that is happening?
It depends on the person. I think some individuals really understand and trust the nonlinear candidate, right?
Yeah.
Somebody
Yeah.
who is more diverse in their thinking and their approach, maybe has a background that isn't just spot on down the middle. But generally, it's funny because people, they want humanity when they want it, but when they want a linear response for humans to do exactly what they're told like a machine, they want that too. So, but you never get the latter. The
No.
latter is not sustainable.
It isn't, but there are things that do need process, right? If you think about operational risk, 3 lines of defense from a financial sector, they're really critical processes in place that protect the employee, the corporation, and the customer, and all of the money that flows between it. So I appreciate there is that balance between the process, but the creative nature of a human and how messy they are. So
No, you said it perfectly. I mean, you cannot be absent structure, and I don't think we should ever demonize it. But I do have people tell me a lot that it does constrain innovation, and I understand why you would say that. But back to our original conversation, creating inside of a framework is just part of the gig.
when you look back on your experience, probably 20 or so years ago when you decided to make that leap, what was that like for you? From musician
Corporate America.
into corporate America.
Well,
Maybe I got.
first of all, I appreciate you saying it was 20 years ago.
I'm here
That
to
was
make you look
really
good, Cameron.
kind. It's terrific. It was a lot longer than that.
Okay.
What happened was, the truth is, I was a good enough musician to work consistently and to get paid, and that was
Wow.
great. I was not good enough to be Wynton Marsalis. I just was never going to get there. I don't really believe in that literally. I didn't want to emulate anybody, but just
Right.
I use him as a proxy for
Yes.
greatness and flexibility. The combination of that reality and the fact that I got married very young, and I needed to be home and not travel all the time and have a steady income, moved me into a real job. Now, musicians rightly hate that terminology. Myself, a real job.
Yeah.
And of course, most of my colleagues, my musician friends at the time said, "You won't make it a year, man. You'll be right back here." But it's been now 30 something more, 32 years or something like that. And that was the catalyst to get me into, the private sector.
So somebody that maybe you didn't have the typical profile, right? The typical background knowledge that you would when you took that gig on. Someone had to take a bit of a chance on you. Is that right?
Yes. Two people took a chance on me. The story of how I got into the private sector is interesting.
Yeah.
I was playing jazz at the time, and there was a guy named Don who was basically our benefactor. He was a municipal bond trader
Okay.
at a Stevens investment firm and a jazz freak. So we spent a lot of time with Don. He traveled with us some, and he taught us finance and
Wow.
how to do life, which to a lot of musicians is a stereotype, but a lot of them are maybe not good at that. We learned how to do that with him. And then when it came time for me to move into the private sector, I talked to him. He was my mentor, and I said, I don't know what to do. I don't have any really marketable skills other than this. And he made a phone call and introduced me to a friend of his at Fidelity Investments. And that's how it got going.
That's crazy cool that
Yeah.
a chance, a relationship in one part of your area can totally change the trajectory of your life. But it doesn't just happen without a lot of hard work, grit, and a willingness to learn. When I hear that story, I think about this notion of skill versus will.
Yeah.
It sounds like you had a lot of will to be able to build the right skills. And from what I understand, doing a little creeping about your background, Cameron, you crushed that exam. You crushed the work you needed to do when you took on that role. So much so that Fidelity Investment said, how can you help others
Yeah.
do the same?
It's true.
What was that like?
Yeah, I'll tell you. But before we get to that, I have to tell you the story. Since you brought up skills and will, what actually happened was Don made a call to his friend at Fidelity. And we had a show the night before. I had to drive all the way to Texas to get this interview with this guy.
Okay.
I got into this guy's office in Dallas, massive office. And I spent maybe 4 minutes with this guy. Now, I didn't have any conception of who this guy was at the time. He was just a friend of Don who was going to see me for a job interview. I hadn't been there a minute or two. And he said very kindly but plainly, "You have nothing to offer me. There's nothing. Like, there's not one thing that you have on your resume that I can help you with, but I'm going to take you downstairs and show you to a place where they might hire you."
Okay.
And he did. He took me downstairs, and I didn't have the idea at the time, but this guy was a big deal. And so coming off the elevator with this guy, they hired me on the spot just to be a customer service rep. That's where I started. And I was glad because I needed to eat. And that's what I didn't have high aspirations. But then one of the things I had to do in short order to do the job was to take a licensing exam,
Right.
the Series 7 exam. And I think that's what you're referencing.
That is what I'm referencing, the Series 7 exam, because that we've been talking a little bit before off camera and now about like the messiness of humans.
Yes.
And how there's a lot of science behind how learning happens, neuroplasticity, there's so much there.
Yes.
But we are humans, and what motivates us and inspires us and how we show up is an art, because everyone's so uniquely different. And putting those two things together to really make an impact is like a unsolvable Rubik's Cube that you always want to twist and turn and keep moving.
It is. I love that part about us.
Yeah. And when I think about this experience you went through, it is a bit of a perfect storm, right? You had the right motivation, you had the will. And so when you walked out of that exam and you crushed it and you did so well, and the company came to you and was ready to get curious about who is this guy that had nothing to offer but is now showing us his killer skills, what was that like for you being a newbie in the corporate world and then being asked to figure out how to scale and help set other people up for success?
Well, it was energizing. First of all, I studied so hard for that test because, again, I needed this job. And I was as surprised as anybody that I'd passed, much less, did as well as I did. So when they asked me to, at first, it didn't happen immediately. It's like, well, this was interesting. And then, for the next few weeks, I tutored some people and they, well, let's just have you teach it.
Yeah.
Teach this thing. And then they put me over the department. And all this happened in a 6-month period. Now, the interesting thing about it is I was so dumb to culture, corporate norms and all that. I just said what I said and did what I wanted to do. And we just started to improve things slowly. In hindsight, the things we did, which I can talk about, are not that fancy. But at the time, they seemed fancy and they worked.
Well, do you think that outsider perspective gave you an edge?
100%. 100%. When you stand on stage to play a jazz solo or God, I tell you, I think playing classical might be challenging in a different way. There's nothing more exposed and scary. So doing this gig, not so scary. It wasn't as tough. And I had the value of just being ignorant to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I just was moving. So I just, for those that are watching, they'd be interested to hear, we only did 3 things and it really helped a lot.
Please, yes, tell us.
The first thing we did was we eliminated the number of external partners we had that were teaching how to pass this test. There were about 7 providers, and then there were internal people, and there was no method, and it was just a mess.
Okay.
So we went down to 1 external provider, and then we created a great internal process to train this test. The second thing we did was we used computer-based training, which was at the time was fancy cool, to practice tests electronically, which that wasn't happening before. That was the second thing. And then we started to do pre-employment testing to see who might be predisposed to being successful at this type of thing. And across those 3 things over a couple of years, our pass rates went from, well south of 50 to north of 90.
That's an incredible achievement. If you were to go back to that time in your life now, is there anything you do differently?
Oh, goodness. In that particular assignment? No, I would do exactly the same. I might do the exact same thing today. I mean, I walked into plenty of chaotic, hectic sort of environments that needed more standardization
Right.
and predictability. That's kind of part of the toolkit over time.
100%. One of the things that I've seen successful in my career is, and this is a framework that I got at my time at Apple when I've taken it everywhere I've gone, is consistency, creating learning that's consistent, scalable, and measurable. And if you can do those three things, it'll never be perfect, but you'll always be able to evolve and have a higher impact. I think that third piece that you talked about, that simulation training, is also so critical because that practice, you talk about being on a stage as a musician, that you got to create those high pressure environments for people to be able to be comfortable in the moment when they're doing that exam.
You have to apply it in context.
Yeah.
You know, I can read all day about how to do something, but until I actually start the doing of it and move it into the physical real-time world, it's not worth a tremendous amount.
Right. You got to pull it down to earth.
Got
And
to pull
so
it down to earth.
now, all these years later, you can't call yourself a newbie in this business anymore.
No.
It's funny, I think you and I have some parallels. Started our family early, was not in this industry, and then natural characteristics kind of propelled us into it. I feel like
We are.
we've got that, and I want to understand, in my experience, I have found that transformation has been the name of the game in business for so long. Digital transformation, modernization of architecture, modernizing our workforce, transforming because of COVID or whatever the new thing is. AI is the latest hot topic.
Yeah.
And learning organizations so commonly will get pulled into that. They're really a key ingredient to a successful transformation. I wonder if you have any advice around, if you're a practitioner being pulled into this transformation projects, what are some things they should be thoughtful of? What are some things that they should avoid? Any advice you have for those large-scale projects?
Advice for people being pulled in to take over
For-
large-scale
Well,
projects?
for learning practitioners who are probably running their shop as they probably have your typical offerings, maybe some skills development, onboarding, leadership development, role-specific training, and then there is a large-scale transformation initiative, perhaps a CapEx involvement. Maybe they've got to revitalize operational risk training or something of that effect. And now this team is being pulled into this transformation project. In those projects, there's typically consultants and
Oh, I know.
yeah. So tell me, how do they navigate that?
I say start with the ending. As best as you can define what the preferred future state is, start there. The other advice I give newer HR professionals is you're a business person first and an HR person second.
Yes.
And if you lead with learning theory or HR policy, you will not be invited back.
You won't. You really
will
won't.
not.
No.
That's it. And then the other thing I'd say, if you have a chance to jump into a big, gnarly, scary project,
Yeah.
go for it. Just run into it because most people do not know what they're doing. Like they're making it up as they go. That's the human condition. There's no reason you can't do it too.
Run straight through it.
Run into the fire.
Well, a minute ago, we talked about how that practical test, that simulation, brought it from theory down to earth, and running through it and getting involved in those transformation projects
Yes.
is a shortcut to be able to do that.
It's a shortcut. And you mentioned neurobiology earlier. There's all kinds of new research coming out every day about neural networks and plasticity and brain growth and pathways. And it's when you're in the stressful situations that everything lights up and you start to become more than you were before. So you have to seek those things out if they're not coming to you naturally.
I love the way you said that. It'll change you in a way.
Yeah, it will. It
Really?
will.
Yeah.
Literally. Like physically and sort of metaphorically. It really happens.
They have done studies on folks that have and researched brain waves and chemistry and what happens when folks are in high stress environments, or even corporations that move really fast where there's no moment where things are the same, and they fundamentally change the way you think and see the world.
That's true.
When you think about the
I
transformation,
just laughing because I'll send you this picture too. It's not a functional MRI, but a few years ago we were working on a project and they had me wear this hat that had all these sensors on it.
okay,
And I looked ridiculous, of course, but I do that anyway.
please send me the photo.
I will send you the photo. But I was just laughing because I was just hoping something would show up on the scan. I didn't know what they'd be able to see. And I was going to be embarrassed in front of my peers if nothing was firing up there.
That's hilarious. Were you on?
I was on. And you know what it was actually, since I know the audience here, we were actually testing something where um, we were looking at brain waves throughout a learning event to see where the dips and the
Yeah.
drips and peaks were. So you could say throughout this process, people tend to drift away here in the content and they tend to get really engaged here. And so it was a window into literal synapse firing.
That is so bloody cool.
It's cool. It's
It
cool.
is. That's incredible. This stuff is super interesting.
I know.
You-
Let's nerd out.
Let's nerd out.
Let's
So
keep going.
let's talk about how that could be. The question I want to ask you is about transformation. Organizations will continue to need to do this.
Yes.
Companies are stating that they believe 40%, 44% of skills that are currently in their business won't be relevant in the next few years. And so they're trying to think about how do we reskill people. That's going to be a massive undertaking. What research, what things have you learned that can help companies think about this problem and how to start solving it?
Well, let's start with just the idea of transformation itself, and then I'll move into your questions about preparing for it. The thing I would encourage individuals to do and companies to do is to transform proactively. Here's what I've seen in my life. Life will bring you demands to change. The financial crisis is a good example for it. But if you find that you're in a period of stasis where nothing is catalyzing change, you better catalyze it yourself, because human obsolescence is absolutely a real thing. Just like
Yeah.
no one has an iPhone 5 anymore, it won't work. But in the moment, it was wonderful. Since you talk about Apple,
Yeah.
so you've got to catalyze your own change if it's not brought to you by circumstance. Let's start there. As it relates to skills and the transforming landscape and all this stuff that you can read
Yeah.
plenty of, I would start by saying I do not subscribe to this apocalyptic, everybody's going to be out of a job, universal basic income narrative. It's just not my thing. That's not the topic of this, but
Yeah.
I stopped short of that. And I also stopped short of sentient AI, which if we get to that, we can talk about that. But inside those constraints, what I found is, number one, most roles do not just die off instantly, right? They tend to die slowly, like a skill here gets replaced, an activity there gets replaced, and slowly over time, the roles shift. So not always, but typically, a person has a chance to retool. But that assumes that they're conscious of the fact that things are moving and they have a pathway to morph.
Right.
And that's part of my job.
How do you make sure that your performance systems are driving the right behavior to get you to that transformation versus maybe getting in the way?
The magic bullet, to the extent there's a magic bullet, it's systems alignment. Most of the time, an individual or a collective behavior is shaped by two or more factors that incent people to act that way.
Right.
So typically, when I'm trying to solve a persistent behavior, typically a negative one, I start with all the systems. Like what all contributes to this?
Right.
Compensation design is my favorite first place to hunt.
Yeah.
Performance management protocols is a great place to hunt. Cultural norms, the things that may not be written down, but the things that are generally accepted, that's a good place to start looking and to get underneath. So typically you'll find 3 to 5 elements of that system that are either aligned to the good or aligned to the bad, and you start to pick them apart piece by piece. That's the move.
So I'm curious your perspective on performance management. How have you seen performance management work well, maybe drive the wrong behavior?
Yeah.
What advice do you have to build the right performance management systems for the world we have today?
Look, my job is to create the conditions for people to do the right things.
Mhm.
My job is to create the conditions for people to behave in predictable ways and align with what we're trying to get done. So if a CEO says, I want this thing done, we immediately start to go back and deconstruct that. Like, how can we create less friction in pursuit of that?
So
It all comes back to that cycle again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And any misalignment in your system is trammeling your growth.
Which is why it's so important, I think, for learning practitioners to say no sometimes, right? If they're getting a training request but it's really related to compensation that's driving the behavior, or leadership, or process documentation.
If I had a nickel for every time a junior learning advisor came and said, they're just demanding that training be the solution for this thing, and they will hear nothing else. Um, and I have a formula for that. I said, well, first of all, what conversation did you have with them? Did you ask them about all the variables? And typically it's like, yes, I did, but they want this thing anyway. My formula is I typically say, we'll do it for them once and without changing any surround sound system and see what happens. And then the next time they come around, they'll have bigger ears and open mind to maybe look at something beyond training. A lot of executives think there's a linear relationship between what you tell a person to do and what they will do. And it never works that way. And I look them in the eye and I go, I know how to get ripped, for example, but I still eat brownies. Like it's not the knowing.
Yeah.
It's the doing.
Doing, yeah.
And what's the gap between the knowing and the doing? Because the answers are in there. But even after that, even if you somehow created a perfectly aligned system, humans are squishy and messy and random, and you're still going to get some weird things. But
Right.
It's all about condition creation. And beyond that, the humans do what the humans do.
Well, I mean, and if you go back to your point around having the right measurement, so that leader that comes back to you with bigger ears and bigger eyes and is ready to listen, that's probably because you have some qualitative, quantitative evidence around things that are impacting the business. And so even though it may not be perfect, even though humans are squishy, if you can get from the knowing to the doing and you have clear indicators of the business metrics you're moving, you can always refine and adjust your approach and see and monitor the changes to the impact, the results. To your point earlier around, if you're in HR,
Yes.
you got to know your business, come through with business details versus HR policy, blah, blah, blah.
That's right. We're supposed to be experts in human behavior. I'm a behavior architect. That's how I think of myself.
Love that language.
So that's as an HR, most of my life was spent as a head of HR.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my first lens in my professional life. And systems alignment.
What do you think about the folks that are worried about massive job losses related to AI? We've talked about that a little bit. What would you say to HR leaders who are trying to think about bringing AI into their workforce, finding operational improvements, but there are people who are worried? Are you worried about that? It doesn't sound like you are. So tell me
About massive job loss.
related to AI. AI is going to replace everybody's job.
It's funny. I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about massive, quick job loss.
Yeah.
Over the arc of time, I'm worried about it. But I don't have the apocalyptic tomorrow afternoon, everybody's going to lose their job because of the reasons we talked about. Typically roles die off one little bit at a time.
Yeah.
If a human has the proclivity to redefine themselves and molt and become, and in my shop, the corporation creates as little friction for that to happen as possible, a lot of people find their way into a new role that is commensurate with the times.
And that arc of history, it always changes.
Always.
Right? The way Henry Ford made vehicles, obviously they were gains, and we are reapplied those gains as a human society to innovate further. So it isn't a doom and gloom.
Humans are compensated. We've been compensated since somebody made a spear, so now we use that to kill the mammoth, or a wheel.
Yeah.
And today we're just compensated by different things. Do I think generative AI is a step change in a new way? 100%. I'm not minimizing it. It's the biggest thing I've seen since the internet, for sure.
Yeah.
But is it going to displace everybody tomorrow afternoon? No.
So what do corporations need to be doing today, HR professionals? I'm thinking about skill-based learning. I'm thinking about organizations that are trying to classify, categorize the knowledge, the skills within their organization so they can be what I like to call have more talent density, meaning the highest critical priorities have the best and right resources at the right time.
Yes.
How do you take a step in that direction?
Companies that want to become more skill-based need to just start by really understanding what that means and begin to set up infrastructure to do this thing. And let's talk about what this thing is.
Yes.
Okay. So to be a skills-based organization, you have to begin to think like you're managing your skills portfolio like you would a stock portfolio or real estate portfolio.
Okay.
That's a mindset shift that a lot of people have trouble getting their head around. But I'll kind of walk you through.
Tell me.
You have to create the conditions to be a skills-based organization.
Yeah.
It's a very easy thing to say, very easy to write papers and speak about it. I've done all of that, but to do it in practice is very difficult. So the first is just understanding what that concept even means, like to manage a portfolio of skills across an entire organization. How much Python do I have in the entire organization?
Right.
Where is it? And what's the quality of it?
Yes.
How many people do I have with strong collaboration skills? Where is it? Who has it? How much of it? Where do I need it? But it's hard to get your head around because humans are just an amalgam of skills and attributes.
Right.
It's not easy to tease them out. The thing that's so fascinating about today, but first of all, everybody always, for all eternity, has been running a skills-based organization. Like that's when you hire somebody, you're trying to get that certain thing to fit, but it's very analog and very one-off, and you just can't see the collective. The change is that we can start to see the collective. I can deconstruct your skills and attributes, what you've acquired, and the quality of them in a way that I've never been able to do before. And it's not just by you self sort of explaining this through your resume. With language models and other ability to crawl around on data and email and look at your history and infer things based on your history, I have a much better opportunity to quantify you, me, and look at you plus you plus you plus you plus you.
Well, I just wonder if you're an organization that perhaps underinvested in HR historically. There's been a big boom, very successful, a lot of growth in our economy. And so we're in more constrained times now. And so it's requiring organizations to think differently about their resources and HR to think differently about the value they show up in the business with.
Yes.
So if you're in that situation and you're right, you can see the future, you can see it coming, you've got people with skills, you just don't know how to start creating the infrastructure. If there was one tip or one thing HR leaders should get curious about to help move them in the right direction so they can build the foundation. Any advice?
At the very most basic, an HR professional, a general manager, forget about HR, should just understand the big arc of the story. Like what skills are dying and what skills are coming on. Let's just start there. The most obvious one today is generative AI.
Yeah.
If you don't know what that is and pushing that through the organization, both conceptually and tactically, you're already behind. Let's start there. Before we do all the fancy stuff,
Yeah.
plenty of basics.
Well, that's a very simple way of saying it. What's the one skill your company will need more of? Or what's the one skill you can see less of? You mentioned earlier in your career, computer-based learning and introducing it as something new and exciting.
I thought it was amazing.
Well, you have been a driving force behind technology innovations and blending learning and technology to make new things possible. Tell me about why you think that's an important angle to play in companies to leverage that technology for learning, and what you think will be beneficial for us to continue to bring into our learning ecosystems from a technology perspective.
Well, with the evolution of compute power and software, we're just able to do things now that we weren't able to do before. So, and we talked about functional MRI earlier. The things that we just know about humans and their brains and how they work, we're just at a rich time in history.
All that you said that, you can now gather all this data across your system. You can pull all these inputs and you can get a good picture of Cameron.
Yeah.
There's a side of the argument that would say that technology is making learning less personal. Right? Yes, I can hyper-personalize a learning path for you, but there's also less human interaction, less social learning.
Yes.
Any thoughts and opinions on that dehumanization of learning through technology?
I understand why people think learning has been dehumanized. And I actually agree with them based on the definition you use for dehumanizing.
Okay.
If your definition is fewer real-time, proximate learning events and conversations, yes. If that's your sole measurement instrument for intimacy and human connection, yes, there's no doubting.
But is that a good measure?
It's a fair measure.
Okay.
Like the pandemic, I think, taught us something. Well, it taught us a lot of things, but even though we were doing a lot of real time learning with each other, it was all distance. It was, and we did lose. There is a thing. There's energy.
Totally.
There's
Totally.
so I feel those people, and when they're begging for more ILT, I totally get it. And what is also true is that we don't have infinite funds, number one, and that's a constraining force. Number two, for a company like Citi, we're in 100 countries, and I don't have the literal reach.
Right.
I can't fund it. So I have to use these other tools, and other people like me, you just make the best decisions you can to balance all those demands.
Well, it's an interesting dichotomy to say that human interaction in the workplace is contingent on ILT versus other cultural systems in place that you would have to generate and foster human connection and trust, which is critical in the workplace. So that's an interesting, it almost becomes a bit of a catch-all. And that's really not the intended purpose. It really was to be able to learn and do something and walk out with a change in your behavior and change in your performance. At the same time, the ability to democratize education, people and places getting access to information that would never be possible before,
Yes,
is so much of the human spirit.
it's amazing. Think about it this way.
Yeah.
Humans have been around for 2 or 3 million years. Things didn't really get going with human creativity and development till about, let's call it 4,000 or 5,000 BCE, which isn't that long ago. We didn't have a common language till about 1,000 BCE. And then the printing press comes along in 1400, then airplanes and just so all the cool stuff and all the distribution of knowledge and skill proliferation is really happen in a narrow band of time. So we're on this thing that's just, and now generative AI is taking democratized, which was catalyzed by the internet.
Yes. Yeah.
And now it's helping to contextualize literally the entire human corpus of all data that's been codified. So it's a whole nother, we've gone from just not even having a common language to everything's democratized. Almost everything is accessible, at least what's been encoded.
Right.
And now it's being contextualized, and some use the term personalization, which is somewhat true. It's an incredible time.
And how it is an incredible time, and it will likely only continue to evolve faster. If you look at those graphs of adoption of technology, they are just hockey stick like you can't imagine.
Yes.
What about the potential negative implication? Data privacy, things like that. Are you concerned about any of
All
that?
true. Yes, I'm concerned about all of it. Privacy is a big deal. Ethical use of all these things. When you move into sort of sentient, embodied AI with free will, sky's the limit. So we should probably exclude that for now. But I think it's like any other technology that's come on over the course of time. We're just going to have to figure it out because we're not going to stop it.
Right. And you're not going to stop the malicious intent component of it either, right? Like if you think of those operational risk trainings that a financial organization will have, there's a lot about like MDME sharing. But if somebody wants to, they will find a way. So it's less about, it's about having the right systems and structures in place to have a healthy system.
Yes.
But human behavior is human behavior.
That's right.
So
I just don't, there are things that we should not create because of their potential damage. I have boundaries, but generally speaking, I don't think fear of the possibility of bad things is a reason to not do it.
So a company recently made big news about introducing to the market a AI employee in their HRIS. It's an HR technology company. And the intention being, if you can tie back the functions and things an AI system is doing within your work to an individual, it creates greater accountability. So Cameron is using this AI in this way, and that framework allows you to tie it back. So I'm curious, made a lot of waves. Good thing, bad thing, give opinions.
An early thing, an inevitable thing that will be a part of everybody's life in short order.
So I hear you have a Cameron AI created about a year ago. Tell me about it.
When GPT 3.5 came out, I was actually going to a conference to speak, and the producer called and said, whatever you have, you're not doing anymore. Whatever your topic was, we're doing generative AI.
Okay.
And I did not know very much about it. So I just jumped in as fast as I could. And through the course of my exploring generative AI, for me, it was ChatGPT 4, which is about 16 months ago, 17
Okay.
months ago. I just dove in. And since you asked about, I use the term proxy, but you use the HRAI. One of the things that I did was I started to become fascinated by, I create conversations between historical figures
Okay.
in GPT. So I would say, create a conversation between Adam Smith and John Keynes about the merits of the democratic
Monetary.
process.
Okay.
Right, or monetary
I
policy.
see.
And it does this extraordinarily well.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Try it. Then Adam talks, John talks, Adam talks, and they say exactly what you think they're going to say because the corpus of information out there about John and Adam is manifold, and the historical basis is all there.
Right.
But then I wanted to get in the conversation. But when I asked GPT to create a conversation between Adam Smith and Cameron Hedrick, it didn't know what to do because there's not enough of me out there.
Right.
And the stuff that it tried, but it was not good.
Okay.
So it occurred to me, well, I'll just create my own me, my proxy me
Okay.
in GPT to see what would happen.
And
it works extraordinarily well. So it's very inelegant. All I did was I just put in, my name is Cameron. I'm 52. I'm an INTJ. I threw in my resume. I threw in 10 writing samples and then all that in the context window.
wow.
And then I said, create a conversation between Cameron and it was amazing.
Would you say it was representative of you?
Well, yes, it was,
Yeah.
but that's the whole trick. When you see a response that it labels as you, but it's not the response you would give, that just gives you the opportunity to go back in and tune your AI. And you can look through it and you go, why does it think I think that instead of what I actually feel? It's the ultimate arbiter. It's the ultimate mirror. So I say all that because I use Proxy Cameron. I talk to myself. I throw papers in. I say, write this more in my voice, or dial down confirmation bias, or dial up this. And this is, if I can do this now this is.
What is really cool is one of the things that's fascinating. The idea that you're able to build that repo. It's almost like, what we see in sci-fi movies, right? We're going to live forever because we're going to upload our consciousness into something, right? Yeah. And the what's so cool is this concept of mirroring back your biases or things that you don't realize that you've leaned in so heavily on that gives you a bit of a reflection of your blind spot.
Try it. Everybody should try it.
But this concept of you doing that on your own time because you wanted to see what would happen. You were curious and it would help you. And it sounds like it's additive to your life. Like you're using it in functional ways.
It's like, imagine life without a Excel or Microsoft. It's that, but even better.
Wow.
Yeah.
So today, world is moving fast.
Yeah.
The concept of continuous learning is easier than ever. The whole world is busier, people say, than ever, even though I believe it's probably relatively stable over the arc of history. How do you ensure learning remains? How do you ensure that this drive for continuous learning and development doesn't result in burnout? Like, is that a risk?
Some people critique this idea of continuous learning and say that it might catalyze burnout. I just don't think of it the same way. I'll start by saying I have to say this a lot inside to my most senior stakeholders. I am not the learning police.
Yeah.
I do not make you learn. That's not my job. Mm-hmm. My job is to create the least amount of friction for those who want to learn. That's it. And if I'm not doing something that I know I can do to enable those people to move faster, that's a failure on my part.
There's probably an element of discovering who those people are. Any advice on how to find those people who are eager? Yeah, tell me.
Yeah. When you have the systems, I'll give you one example. We have a system called The Greed. It's a learner experience platform. And you can see like who's consuming the most content, who's setting up communities of practice, who's setting up pathways. There are things that you can use as an indicator that these people are learning, self-initiated learning type people. Right. You can also, we've done correlation studies on ratings and comp and promotion, and typically those who are with intent, moving and shedding the old skin, putting on the new stuff, actively working against personal obsolescence,
Yeah.
they do better.
I love that language.
They-
There's an element too around, we talked a bit about potentially humanity fading away without ILT, which I don't believe is true because human connection comes in many shapes and form. But this concept of social learning has become so important. And the same kind of thought process remains true. You've got people who are highly engaged in your knowledge management. They're collaborating with high quality, trustworthy, reliable information. You can see those folks as champions for knowledge management and probably most other things in the business
That's right.
and tap into those and help extend it. And it goes back to that concept of skills. If you're in an HR, how do you understand where your talent is? And I know that's an area that you had to dig in deeply through the financial crisis, going through some really tough times as the world was in that era, and having to make some tough decisions. Any advice, thoughts you have in the good times? What should people be doing to prepare so they're set up to have to make those, when, if and ever they have to make tough decisions like that, to do it in a way that's results in the most positive outcome?
So it's the heart of your question, how to prepare for these dramatic type of events, or how to catalyze them on your own, or
Oh, that's a good angle.
which one do you want to take on?
Well, there's two. There's the element of leadership. How do you show up as a leading? And in good times can be difficult. So there's an element of leadership, and how do you show up?
Yeah.
But if you zoom out and look at it from a functional HR perspective, what are the things that HR teams should be doing to be able to make sure if they have to make those tough calls, they know where the skills are and who is in their business?
Let's talk about leadership in crisis first, and then we'll get down to the HR moves, if you will. There are two kinds of crises that I've sort of lived through, COVID and the financial crisis, so in a very senior role.
Yeah.
Those are crises that were brought on by the universe that you didn't have a lot of control over. And in my view, those are actually easier to navigate than the crises you have to generate for yourself. For example, a large transformation, absent any catalyst other than your own will.
Yeah.
How you lead through a crisis of your own making versus a crisis that you didn't make are two different things.
Yeah.
On the crisis management that you did not make, like COVID, the leadership imperatives are communicate more than you think you have to. Shrink all your time frames as much as you can. You're typically dealing with very dynamic situations, and you're living it sometimes hour to hour.
Yeah.
Involve as many people as you can to make decisions, but don't let that trammel your growth, because you've got to move through this in very dynamic period of time before it smooths out. And the HR apparatus needs to have strong communication rails, lots of authenticity, be comfortable with saying I don't know or I can't tell you,
Yeah.
and just move through it with as much humanity as you can.
How did that experience change the way you approach leadership?
I wouldn't say these crises fundamentally changed the way I led.
Okay.
I've been a transparent, sometimes too much so, heart-led, intuitive leader from the jump. That just happens to show up pretty well in times of crisis. What it has taught me, though, just as a human, I guess less as a leader, is that humans are way more resilient than I had imagined. I think I used to approach humans with a lot more skepticism than I do now. I think the majority of us are good, and we will work together, and we will figure it out.
Yeah.
And that has been proven out more often than not.
That's a very lovely notion. Do you feel where we are today, when you talk to colleagues in other organizations, are companies prepared to handle future drastic things like that?
Crises?
Yeah, crises.
The crises like COVID wasn't of our own making. The crises of political dissent and civil issues, these are more in our control, but they're the types of things I worry about now. Citi is a massive operation. We have Ukrainian colleagues, Russian colleagues. We have, in the US, we have colleagues in red states and in blue states. So dealing with dissenting views is becoming more and moving up the chain of capabilities that we have to help other people do. Bring your full self to work, but there are boundaries. And how do you do that relative to your views on any number of issues that I can name right now? That
Yeah.
it's not easy.
We talked earlier about skills, right? What's the one skill you need to keep growing, and what's a skill you're likely going to shed as a company, and focusing on those. And this is an interesting way you're framing this, because you are right that we have said, bring your best self to work, bring your whole true you. We want that. We want that for you to do your best work here.
Yes.
But within what bounds and what constraints?
Yes.
Going back to that constraint and innovation conversation we were happening earlier.
I'm not sure when that became popular, bring your whole self to work, we had the views that we have today of some of the strong viewpoints that we have today. Of course, I believe in it. Of course, I want people to bring their full self to work, but there are limits to how you can talk.
Right.
And if you are going to talk about difficult issues, the way you do it and the way you have to be open to and malleable is also important. These are the hard things to teach.
Totally, because the concept of debating and communicating, these are squishy and difficult, and people are trying to work on their day jobs. So it's creating more friction and tax and toil for folks trying to navigate how to manage. It's tough, but it's good to be able to talk openly about it, because
It is.
you got to solve for it. It is happening, and if you turn a blind eye, you're not going to be able to solve it. Like, the transparent accountability needs to be possible for it to become a solvable issue.
It's true. I'm working on a project right now where I'm trying to codify the 20 superpowers of the most successful executives that I've seen.
Okay.
And successful not only in the objective view, but how they got there. People that I've been up close and personal with. And the other reason I bring that project up is one of the 20 is, and I didn't work on the words, but people that can navigate their own responses and reactions to things. The folks that are a little more, I'm going to take this in.
Yeah.
It's not going to attach to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to run it through versus, react and explode, which I have to watch. Younger Cameron, I had a big problem with that. But I watched that, and I think that skill in any era, but particularly today, given all the things, this is the superpower. You have to take in lots of different views, and you can't co-opt yourself into that narrative too fast. It's not easy to do.
There's a parallel too with just information overload, like the ability to filter noise and figure out what matters. There's like a parallel thing happening to humans because of technology, and making it harder to synthesize, and that's relevant for the job to be done in the moment.
That's right. That's right. And this gets into this whole echo chamber thing with social media, and you get fed more of what it thinks you want to see. So your view actually gets smaller and smaller and smaller of the world. You have to work. It's a paradox. With all this contextualization and democratization, you actually have to work harder to get a dissenting view or a view contrary to yours than you used to. It's
Learning
wild.
professionals have an interesting role to play here, because everybody is a content creator, but that's not educational content, even though someone receiving it may hear it as.
Totally.
And so it's going to be an interesting time, I think, for our function and practice. It's very different things. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about, similarly, a topic, democratizing education and financial literacy.
Okay.
We talked a little bit about your early career experience and Don, who imparted wisdom of, how
to balance a checkbook.
How to balance a checkbook. And
Wild concept.
thank God for Don, because not a lot of people have that consistently. I'm curious your role. What's your opinion on the role of schools, on private sector, on governments, and providing financial literacy to people?
Yes, it's important. Yes, we need to do more of it. Citi does a lot of it.
Yeah.
We do more. Yes, I don't think and we have a social responsibility to society. Social responsibility to society. I'm just saying it the same way, two different ways. Financial literacy is tip of the iceberg, right? I think we could probably do better with beyond financial literacy to just life literacy. and how to just be a human and move through the world with a little more grace and a little more intent.
The world would be a better place, that's for sure.
Yes.
Right, and there's some tricks we can learn about how to continue to improve the way that people consume learning, and it's really cool to see the work that Citi's done to, like, embed technology and make it hyper relevant and engaging for the people on your teams. So do more of that, please, and tell us how it goes. Do you think that we can talk about the future a little bit?
Let's do that.
Yeah,
My
I
favorite
want to
thing.
give you an opportunity to whip out your crystal ball. This is a question I ask all of the guests that are on Leaders in Learning, and it's really about making 3 predictions. The first prediction is something you are 90% sure is going to happen, so you're hella confident. The second one is something you're 50% sure, probably going to happen. The last one is something that you're like 10% sure. You think it could happen, but it's a little, there's a bit more risk there. Perhaps it's a bit more out of the box.
Okay. Well, in the future, I'm 100% certain
Okay.
that adaptive learning will become more and more the norm. And by adaptive, I mean asynchronous, computer-based adaptive learning. It works pretty well today, and that's absent generative AI models. So with large language models instilled, I think bespoke path for every learning experience will be the future. 100%.
Okay.
80%, I'll move to your second one.
Okay.
What was it? 80%, 70%? We
50%.
talked 50%. We talked a little bit earlier about AI assistants, AI proxies, AI,
Right.
embodiments. I use that term carefully to do all number of things: tutor, assist, answer your emails, coach you. Under 100%. Sorry, I know you said 50, but I know that sounds outrageous to a lot of people, but you can do a lot of that now. It's inelegant, it's sloppy, sometimes it makes you laugh, but the concept itself was hardly a thing 3 or 4 years ago. The fact that we have what we have now
Right.
is huge, and I think I'll move to the 50. I'll take an extension of what I just said and move to your 50%.
Okay.
I wonder when we're going to get a personal proxy that we own, that you own and I own mine, and we can tell it when to act as an agent on our behalf. For example, this interview.
Yeah.
Why couldn't I have my proxy that I have owned and engineered talk to your proxy ahead of time, and then they come back to us and go, hey, when you get to this topic, she's probably going to go this way, and you're going to want to talk about this. So I think the empowered, highly tuned proxy that we own is a thing. Remember too, right now, somebody already has a proxy of you. Netflix has an idea of who
That's
you
right.
are. Amazon has
So many.
The thing is that they're pushing through what they think you are.
Mhm.
I want to change that, and I think we will push who we control that layer.
Right. So you can help define what that is and then push it out, whether it be in social interactions. Perhaps you need to tell your kid the same thing 18 times. Like there's a lot of use cases.
They're never ending. So it's the ultimate assistant. It's the ultimate inflow filter. So that's a 50%. Look, the 10%.
Yeah.
Now we're going to have to start flirting with general artificial intelligence. The space between where we're at and general artificial intelligence, meaning one that's at least some form of consciousness.
Okay.
Is it conscious? Is it sentient? Is it embodied? I mean, as you add each of those things, the complexity gets greater and greater. We will have some version of something between now and general AI. Do I think we're going to have an embodied, sentient, conscious, self-motivated AI? I don't.
Okay.
Many people say we will. So I have to take the 10% on that one. But
Okay.
there's a lot of space between where we are and where we're going to be. I'll leave it at that.
Before we wrap, I'm curious if there's anything that you want to talk about, any topics, any questions, or things you want to dig into that we haven't chatted about yet.
It's a good question. I did want to talk about about the space between generative AI as we know it today
Yeah.
and general artificial intelligence, which we started to talk about. I would say to our listeners here, if you're a learning or an HR professional in the more senior ranks, you have to start thinking about that now. That humans have always been compensated, as we talked about, not compensated monetarily. We've always been augmented
Right.
by something. That's going to continue. So are your structures flexible enough to take that on? Are your sensing mechanisms tuned enough to accommodate that? Are your people aware that this is coming? And are they, how much friction is there between the role they have and the role that they might need to go into? These are things that are absolutely going to happen. And we, this is where we can lead, one of the many places we can lead.
That's why that adaptive technologies become so important to make all of that happen.
Well, adaptive learning technology is it's important in the single, like a single topic and in aggregate. I think though adaptive in the term that I think you're using is a much more fulsome version of the one that I talked about a second ago.
Yeah.
Adaptive, when you feather in your empowered proxy and a skill X-ray of who you are, adaptive goes to some other level. It's something that we can get to fairly easily in the next 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
But that kind of adaptive, to your point, is mind blowing and absolutely should happen in our lifetime for sure.
I appreciate your time. I would want to talk about this more and more, but
It's fun, isn't it?
it is. I mean, in the concept of the rapid pace of change and the reality that all of these things will change the way we work, but also not change the way we work. Because at our
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. How will it not? It's a really good question for people in the middle of change. Like, ask what's not going to change.
Yeah.
That helps put the rudder in the water sometimes and calms people down. Humans are imbued with some magical, durable things that are impossible to code. Consciousness is the most obvious one, but compassion,
Yeah.
the fact that we have an energetic sort of signature, the fact that we were somehow created to not be able to stand alone.
Yeah.
We are, by design, puzzle pieces that have to fit into the next person and the next thing. These are things that are very durable, that are not going to disappear with AI and in the near future. And I think we should be optimistic about the future.
I sure am. And I think you said that so beautifully. Thank you, Cameron, for taking the time to share your expertise and tell us a bit about how you think the future will play out.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's been fun.
Yes, it has been. Thank you so much.